The cistern was easily accessible, but reaching the opposite chamber requires some tinkering. The elevated connecting bridge won't obey any orders until its corresponding machinery is properly set up, something which can be done in the machine control room. This machinery area has a similar calm and isolated feel as the elevator control area back by the back hall, the environment being filled with a machinery's ambient humming, although the Guardian's distant and unnerving roars have been replaced with muffled rain. An early flashback arises, possibly the earliest one of them all.
Herbert, how did we find this place?
An old friend back in Algiers gave me a map.
Why isn't he with us? Didn't he want to come?
He wanted to, Daniel, but things don't always turn out the way we planned.
Daniel probes his companion Herbert about the place, wondering how it was able to be localized despite the difficulty in navigating and documenting the area. This is referred to in the first journal entry by Daniel near the start of the game. Herbert briefly mentions that a well-documented map was given to him by a friend, who was interested in coming with them, but airily states that things do not always turn out the way we plan. This could be innocent, of course. Perhaps his friend simply fell ill, although the way Herbert brings this up almost sounds like as if the two of them had a disagreement of a kind. I mean, we know next to nothing about Herbert, nor what he is capable of. One thing we do know is that Herbert had Alexander, the Baron of Brandenburg Castle, in his address book, which in itself I find to be shady. Furthermore, when Daniel had a peek into Herbert's journal entries, it was mentioned that Herbert had to take extreme measures in relation to his guides when exploring an ancient tomb. So with that in mind, who knows what could have happened between Herbert and his so-called friend? It could, of course, also be that Herbert had nothing to do with his friend not wanting to come, or even worse, being unable to. If Herbert's friend had a map leading to an orb's location, is it not plausible that his friend would have been at the location as well? It could be that the Guardian of the Orbs maimed or even killed this person, thus being unable to come. Quite creepy when one thinks about it. Lastly, as the flashback is about to fade, there is a loud, eerie sound, which at first sounds haunting, but it is most likely just the sounds that the camels make. I know it gave me shivers the first time I played the game, as this unknown sound came quite unexpected.
But things don't always turn out the way we planned.
Chairs are tipped over, almost as if a fight had been going on at one point. There are boxes spread around everywhere. The hallway is messy, and it can send a signal to the subconscious mind that danger might lurk. I did not at all feel safe here my first time around, despite the relatively calm atmosphere. This area consists of 3 control chambers for each bridge. The right-hand side, from the current perspective, controls the bridge to the cistern. Everything should be in order in all of the right-hand chambers. In contrast, the left-hand chambers will need some looking at, seeing as the opposite bridge is inoperable. The hallway is divided by a valve-operated gate. Once you let go of the valve after opening it, the gate will slowly close. Once again, I did not feel entirely safe here during my first playthrough, and if you had the same thought process as me, then you would have clogged the mechanism half shut, making for an easy escape should anything give chase, while being able to quickly close the gate behind us. Desperate times call for critical thinking. At the other side, there's an even bigger mess. Even pillars have fallen over, serving as a reminder that Brennenburg Castle is slowly collapsing. How much longer will this area be accessible? Daniel needs to hurry. The end of the hallway hosts a room where pipes need to be placed in a certain configuration, and even here, the left portion's current setup is way off. The pipes are even missing. These can be found laying scattered around in various chambers. The first mechanism is based on weights, and these have to be hoisted in the appropriate height. You need to pay close attention while turning each valve. When you hear a distinct click, you'll know that the weight is set correctly. Once all weights are set appropriately, a portion of the machinery will awaken, something which should be both felt and heard. Calibration in this chamber is complete. Now, on to the next chamber. This piston-like component has a confusing control panel, being operated by 4 different levers. Once fully lowered, the machinery will further awaken, something which once again can be both felt and heard. This does not seem to go unnoticed, however. Activating such machinery may be felt in several areas, and the Baron attempts remote communication.
Daniel? Is that you? What are you doing?
It is uncertain if Daniel was able to communicate with the Baron for some time using telepathy. After all, the Baron used the power of the orb to unleash some power onto them both. At this point, I believe that the Baron is not truly aware of Daniel's main objective, which is to locate and violently bring him to justice. Although at the very least, he has a hunch that Daniel is up to mischief. The Baron locked himself up in his inner sanctum for a reason. He seems puzzled at what Daniel is trying to achieve. I believe that the Baron might have been aware that Daniel broke down after realizing the truth of this all, that the Baron would leave this world, and that Daniel had done all these horrible deeds to innocent people, only to stay behind and having to face the Guardian's judgment alone. And I do believe that the Baron was aware that Daniel roamed far away from the inner sanctum in his crushing realization and intense sorrow. So, what is Daniel doing so close to the inner sanctum, and why is machinery being started up again? The Baron might believe that Daniel is somewhat on cooperated terms at the moment, as might be hinted on multiple occasions towards the very end. Daniel is not responding, however, possibly making the Baron even more curious and worried. On the table rests a basic wooden crank. This is an item which some players never get to use, while other players desperately are in need of, and it will very soon be apparent why. Once the 3 missing pipes have been collected and attached in the correct configuration at the end room, the machinery will be fully operational, giving functional symmetry to the outside platform. Do note the interesting detail of flooring shadow in the middle of the room, as this appears to be of a cogwheel which now is rotating. The hallway is filled with a wonderful mechanical noise, indicating that things should be in working order. It is time to leave behind the fantastic machinery and head towards the cistern entrance. If you did like me on my paranoid playthrough, then you would just sneak under the half-open gate, happy that nothing bad stalked you yet. However, if you would go around using the gate normally, then you would have a problem. The old rusted valve snaps right off. There is no way to reattach it. Thankfully, the wooden crank now in our inventory will do just fine as a temporary replacement, allowing for an exit. During my first playthrough, this item made me really curious, as I never had the opportunity to use it due to my paranoid behavior in this very hallway. There are various interesting story snippets that are shown each time when transitioning to another area, and while I am going to dedicate an episode for all of these, I have the urge prematurely to bring up this particular one occurring on the way back. Alexander knew there must be a way to finish the ritual before it was too late. He had to teach his friend to harvest the vitae. That much was certain. This refers to the Baron's need for vitae being put on a timer as the Guardian draws nearer and eventually would be able to take him before his escape from this world. Daniel's help was needed, or as the Baron put it, he got here just in time. The Baron tells Daniel to prepare for a warding ritual, likely involving vitae extraction, which Daniel believes will temporarily shield him from the Guardian, although the truth is likely that it wasn't to protect Daniel at all, instead giving the Baron a higher chance of escaping. The machinery needed to operate the bridge is now operational, and a yank at the lever should lower the bridge finally. Curse be these rusted mechanisms. Now what? The machinery is in working order, but somehow the bridge is jammed, causing it to not respond to the control stick. It needs a little rough treatment in order to move again. A heavy rock should be able to do the trick. Parts of ruins may be brought to the upper platform, and with a basketball throw, the impact it makes will send the bridge crashing into the docked position. As with many puzzles in Amnesia: The Dark Descent, there is more than one solution to this challenge. The cistern bridge has a slight delay to it upon commanding for elevation, so for the brave adventurer, you may hurry over to the cistern bridge, gain some altitude, and at the right moment perform a leap of faith over to the other bridge. Try not to wait too long, however, as such excessive height difference could be fatal. After the quick fix, both bridges are in working order, and not least, the mystery area becomes available at last. Upon realizing where it leads to, however, one might wish that this side's bridge remained non-operational. The morgue is revealed, and it is not for the faint of heart. The concealed morgue hall feels more like an extension to the isolated prison from before, rather than belonging to the more open and natural cistern entrance. The environment looks the same, if not even more claustrophobic, and it even carries the same ambience track as what can be heard and felt throughout the northern prison areas. A flashback is about to arise, and hearing the Baron's somewhat reassuring voice for the first time in combination with this ambience gives an unexplainable anxiety. How do you feel?
Do you see, Daniel? It has yielded.
What?
The shadow.
It has?
For now. Come, let's get this out of here so we can get some peace.
Yes, let's. Where to?
Just down the corridor, to the morgue.
Are there more dead men there?
You did well, Daniel. Come, let's get going.
The Baron tries to reassure Daniel that this dubious assistance benefits him, referring to something yielding, hinting that the Guardian is temporarily keeping some distance due to the so-called warding rituals. Whether or not the sacrifice of another really helps is uncertain, but what is certain is that the Baron needs the vitae-rich blood for something else regardless, so the warding ritual might all just be a bluff. Daniel asks, what has yielded? And it has? In a way, that tells me Daniel currently is not in a healthy state of mind. He appears overly tired, unfocused. It makes me wonder how exactly it supposedly would have yielded. Perhaps some fleshy residue would disappear? Or distant roars would vanish? Or perhaps the Baron is just exploiting Daniel's current state of mind in an attempt to further brainwash him. Let's get this out of here so we can get some peace, refers to an unconscious or dead man, and they seem to be heading towards the morgue chambers at the time. The plot thickens a bit by Daniel asking if there are more dead men there, to which the Baron responds with, "You did well." At first, it makes it sound like as if Daniel had killed multiple people at this point, But as I hear Daniel asking if there currently are more dead men there, it makes me think that Daniel was just done torturing and killing his first victim in person. If Daniel had killed multiple, he would not have questioned what would await in the morgue, or even asking what is down the corridor in the first place. Yes, that is probably it. His first encounter with inflicting pain, ending with a death even, goes against former Daniel's morals. Yet he simply has to do this, and it takes a toll on his mind, as it would with anyone. Many of those who fell victim in the castle or dungeons through torture or from a gatherer's hot pursuit, not to mention starvation and illness, were likely put into the morgue chambers by those same servants of Brennenburg. The grim hallway's walls are equipped with small candles, offering a memento of the dead. A rope in the ceiling swings in a haunting fashion, and even if it has a natural explanation, it puts an emphasis on the sinister mood of the place. The hallway splits into two, and following the branching corridor will lead you closer to the morgue chambers. There are blood patterns on the crude stone ground, and it might reveal that the morgue was not merely a place for the dead. The sudden stains of a pair of hands stand out, showing attempts at grabbing hold of the ground pattern before succumbing and being dragged further into the morgue. It is hinted that someone was still alive, yet was put in there regardless. Keep note of this, there might be more evidence to interpret shortly. The door at the end first leads to a clinical study. The elephant in the room is a corpse, which rests on a nearby table. The floor is covered with a great amount of blood. Amidst vials on the shelf, there is an old note, likely written by none other than the Baron himself. It documents that there have been odd deaths occurring, and that the cause now is pinpointed to the drained sewers. Why the sewers were being used for transport in the first place is a mystery to me, because I assumed that the large door in the cistern entrance would lead almost to the prisoner's destination, but I could of course be wrong, and that the drained sewers would make for a much needed shortcut. It could also be that at this point in time, the Garden of the Orbs already have caused cave-ins to hinder passage through this large door. Looking more into the strange death's exact location also leads to the discovery of a certain fungi's properties, producing a poisonous, even lethal gas. Not only is the Baron losing servants and prisoners alike, but the surviving patients become insufficient for his project after being exposed to the hazard, leading him to research for an experimental vaccine right away. One interesting thing to note is that the gatherers seem as affected by the poisonous air as the prisoners, meaning that they indeed have need for air in order to survive, or operate, if you will. Although this need can also sometimes be heard, particularly when a servant grunt is nearby, as it makes a low, raspy exhale, or even a rapid and exhausted breath during a chase if you pay close attention. Interacting with the corpse, Daniel will note that the corpse seems relatively fresh. It is former Daniel who was used to corpses, and since all such experiences are now effectively gone, current Daniel likely breathes a bit more heavily. The Baron never did receive a response from Daniel while he was still in the machinery chambers.
I hear you breathing, Daniel. Do you hear me? Have you changed your mind?
Once again, telepathic communication is attempted in real time. The Baron becomes increasingly curious, wondering about Daniel's intentions. So, Daniel, what does the Baron mean? Have you changed your mind about what? Is he referring to your assistance in general throughout your stay here? Maybe after you and the Baron had a quarrel, he was hoping that you would come back to being a faithful assistant? Or is the Baron questioning if we are no longer faithful to him? For all we know, the Baron wanted to merely locate Daniel, although the Gatherer servants might be a bit harsher and violent than the Baron intended for. Or perhaps the Baron wanted to kill Daniel ever since locking himself into the inner sanctum. It's all a vague mystery at this point, but no less intriguing. On the desk, a note details the conclusion of the vaccine research. The vaccine works flawlessly, but requires a complicated procedure. Something about the text sounds a bit off though, as the procedure will be implemented for prisoner transport. Either there is not enough vaccine for the servants as they are not prioritized, or procedure for giving the servants the vaccine is much tougher than it is for humans. The latter makes more sense for me, as their skin is said to be tough and thick, if they are even receptible for this type of vaccine. 2 doors each lead further into a morgue chamber, and yes, Daniel, there indeed are more dead men there, so brace yourself well. A couple of ceiling lanterns shine a weak light upon the dark deeds of the past. Entering one of the morgue chambers induces anxiety at an alarming rate. Daniel will make some unhealthy sounds periodically, and while sanity is being drained in excess from the shocked mind, a chilling sound fills the atmosphere, sounding like a perpetual church bell from a funeral stuck in time. Whether this is an auditory hallucination from insanity or a bizarre form of tinnitus due to shock, I am not sure. It might even be a timeless energy stuck in place, a manifestation of the victim's terror, as certainly not all of them were dead upon being brought here. In this here chamber, it looks like someone attempted to crawl away from the pile and towards the crematorium. Bodies are stored in holes in the walls, and oh god, the smell. No, Daniel has to leave this chamber immediately. The other chamber is similar, although it has no furnace nor holes in its walls, and looks overall like a wet chamber for showering or the likes. At least I hope that's mostly water on the chamber floor. Thankfully, the water dripping and natural sounds give this impression. We are near the open cistern area, after all. A single lamp offers some light for 2 piles of bodies. Bloody handprints on the wall, further proofs that some victims were still alive when brought here. I desperately hope that this was a rare exception rather than the norm. Furthermore, they were able to even stand upright, judging by the placement of the prints, suggesting that the doors were fully locked or at the very least guarded. Daniel can be heard furiously thinking to himself in response to the Baron moments ago.
Who are you to question me?
If these are the morgue chambers, then what could be further ahead out in the hall? A prison door is off its hinges, and human skeleton remains have poured out of the room at the end. Considering there are only bones left, these could be very old victims, but one should also consider the fact that the morgue chambers were veiled with functioning doors, while this room is open to the rodent-infested hall. But why were there so many people thrown in here? Were these separated from the other corpses for a reason? The same bell-like sound is present in this previously isolated room. A lingering flashback approaches Daniel, but it is not one of his own.
happened? Why are all these dead? Where am I? What's happening? Help! Anybody! Help!
One of the victims wakes up after being sedated, knocked out, or simply rendered unconscious from inhumane confinement. The corpses were most likely intact at that point in time, as otherwise I imagine the man would react a bit differently. Besides, the door was functional at the time, ensuring the man stay confined. Even if Daniel stands motionless, a second fragment of past is being assembled, now a few days later, showing that this area was not often accessed at the time.
3 days now. This is ridiculous. Why doesn't someone come to this room? Hey! Anybody? Am I all alone here? Help! Help! I'm so tired. If I sleep, will I wake from this nightmare? If not, I pray my Heavenly Father will take me in my sleep.
Maybe throwing some prisoners in here or into the morgue chambers, very much alive, was considered an experimental torture method. It is the dreadful anticipation and fear that seems to produce the vitae that the Baron seeks to harvest. Perhaps this victim is even playing a part in creating the vaccine. The method is not at all described other than potentially being complicated, and maybe something had to be injected into a carrier for a few days before it could be collected in the form of a blood sample. This is all just wild speculation, of course, and it is somewhat based on what will be performed in the morgue study soon. There are a lot of scratches on the wooden walls, accompanied with blood marks from all the desperate attempts of escape. A wooden plank has been partially ripped out, only to destroy any remaining hope, as the wall continues in the form of solid rock. On the shelf lays a copper tube. In this instance, going back will cause a similar event as experienced at the start of the game, as if Daniel is back on SS Hortensia. The corpse in the morgue study contains the vaccine, good for one traversal of the drain sewers. It is a bit risky, as there is no way to get the vaccine without blood, and if the blood type does not match with Daniel's, a lot of things can go wrong. While I do not know a lot about blood typing, from my understanding there is one blood type that can give to all without any complications, and it could be that the Baron became aware of this, despite not being human himself. Using the hand drill, a hole can be made into the skull to expose the vaccine and, as a side effect, blood. The hand drill breaks in this procedure, but where one combined item dies, another takes its place. The hollow needle may be combined with the copper tube to act as a vaccination syringe. I have always hated needles though, and this does not help me conquer that aspect. The copper tube does not have to be combined with the hollow needle using the inventory menu. The copper tube may in fact be inserted first, and since a sharp edge is needed to penetrate the skin, the hollow needle may be attached. Interacting with the handcrafted syringe injects the blood of the victim into Daniel, carrying the vaccine along with it. Now, what happens next I find interesting. At first glance, a few seconds might pass, but pay close attention and you'll not only consider the vision going dark, but that a few heartbeats can be heard, indicating that Daniel might have passed out from the injection. Vision eventually returns, with Daniel gasping for air. This could be considered similar to the flashback moments ago about waking up and having passed out, although it still does not make sense why he was left there. Maybe the prisoner wasn't needed anymore and thus was left to rot. All is done, and Daniel should be prepared to traverse the drained sewers. Leaving does not prove to be easy though. Upon reaching for the door, a loud bellow is emitted and a fierce slam attempts to tear down the door from the other side. Daniel cannot afford to hesitate. He needs to hide where he can in one of the two morgue chambers. Although this guard servant can annihilate a door in 1 or 2 hits when provoked, this one spends 5 hits before entry, giving the notion that it does not necessarily suspect anyone being here at this time. This gatherer is often referred to as a servant brute, as this is a much stronger, angrier and deadlier version than the former, more klutzy servant grunt. The angry noises emitted, along with its strict aura, is enough to terrify any human in the vicinity. Its movements causes metallic scraping. The fierce roars could sound a bit like a large bear or a mutated whale, but there is no doubt that it is a hostile cry. Both chambers can be used for hiding from the curious brute. It can also be worthy a mention that if the door to the study was open all along, then it will suddenly turn out to be closed when Daniel comes to after injecting himself with the vaccine, buying him some time in order to hide. There is not a trace left of the door. Where did this creature come from, and where did it go? Is it possible that this was the prison guard earlier, seen roaming through the prison areas? Regardless, if it did not appear and vanish out of thin air, then it shows that these creatures somehow are capable of climbing ladders. The fungi's fume's dangerous effect is temporarily negated by the vaccine now in Daniel's blood, and it is time to traverse the sewer in hope of finding a way to the inner sanctum. But how that goes will be seen in the next episode. The cistern entrance might contain the calmest and purest environment and atmosphere, as things will definitely become darker and crazier from this point on. So take in some fresh air, along with a relatively soothing atmosphere while you still can, and have a pleasant night.